everybody. Welcome to ABA Inside Track, the podcast that's like reading in your car, but safer.
Way safer.
I lost where the emphasis should be in the introduction to the show.
We also
I really want to be your friend.
We also didn't do sound check.
We
sound great.
I assume it's great.
Amazing.
Great.
I assume our listeners are saying this is an amazing podcast about
Unclear.
prosody. I don't know. What do they talk about on this show, they would say? And I would say that's a great question. I hope you can hear me because we didn't do a sound check. And if you can't hear me, it's a podcast about behavior analysis and behavior analytic research, where every week we pick a topic and discuss relevant research articles related to said topic.
Okay, that's enough of that.
That's enough of that.
Yeah.
That's horrible.
Actually, you're going to get one more chance to do that because I would like for you to note the alternate title I've provided you.
Okay.
Okay.
I haven't even said the original title.
I know. Well, let's say them both right now.
Okay. This week's episode is about social validity. It's called Assessing Social Validity, or What's the Deal with Social Validity?
Wow.
I knew you'd want to do that.
That's good. I
That's my
did.
little gift to you.
What is that? What is that? What verbal operant is that?
To answer your question, I think it's intonation and prosody.
Yes, but so there's not a verbal. Well, what's the verbal operant where you specifically write something in a way that is going to cue me to say something in a certain way? Is that one? What would that be? Would it be a verbal operant because I'm just saying the same thing?
One of those.
Well, it is a verbal operant, obviously.
Yeah.
Because it's
yes,
verbal behavior.
But the fact that I'm saying it in a certain way, is that relevant?
Emphasis.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know. I'm not
Great
really a
question.
VB expert here.
Great question. Right in, VB
experts. It has
experts.
to do with translation from text to oral speech. And that.
Well, it's textual, but at the same time, I'm not asking why did I say what's the deal with social validity. I'm asking why did I say it in the tone of voice that I did. I don't know. Nor does anyone care because that's not what they came to this episode for.
Yeah, now you got me all confused.
They
I don't know
came
the
hear
answer
about
to that. I'm
assessing
sorry.
social validity.
Yeah.
So we're going to be talking all about social validity, which is something that we've brought up many, many times on the show in the context of other episodes. But I don't believe we've ever talked about some of the deep dive issues as to how do you even figure out social validity? A Likert scale, right? That's it. The end. Or is it?
It's going to be a short episode. No, we've definitely done a whole episode on social validity, but
shows what I remember.
Takes it in a whole new direction.
Okay. What are we going to talk about that's different than the last time we talked about social validity then, Diana?
Okay. We have three main articles to discuss related to social validity for today and one gravy article to go with. So they include Social Validity Assessments is Current Practice State of the Art by Schwartz and Baer. That was published in JABA 1991, but don't you go thinking that it is obsolete because it absolutely is not.
You know what? That author never has anything obsolete, by the way.
Eileen Schwartz or Don Baer?
Both.
Both, but Eileen Schwartz is the GOAT.
Yes.
I love her.
More serious.
Yeah.
Oh, man.
I know. I know. I definitely have a professional crush on.
Oh, yeah.
On her,
my heart eyes are beaming out of my head right now.
Yeah, she looks like Bugs Bunny.
All
right.
So you're like the wolf and like your tongue's rolling out like a carpet now?
Yeah.
But professional. But in a professional
professionally.
capacity. Yes, of course. We also have Assessment of Social Validity Trends in the Journal of Applied Behavior Analysis. That is by Ferguson et al., published in the European Journal of Behavior Analysis back in 2008, followed up by Social Validity of Evidence-Based Practices and Emerging Interventions in Autism by Callahan, Hughes, Mehta, Toussaint, Nichols, Ma, Kutlu, and Wang. And that was in Focus on Autism and Other Developmental Disabilities 2017. And finally, rounding us out, thematic and textual analysis methods for developing social validity questionnaires in applied behavior analysis by Anderson, Taylor, and Viruez Ortega, Behavioral Interventions 2022.
Beautiful.
I love all of these.
It's a lot of
Yeah, we got a
articles.
lot to talk about.
We got a lot to talk about. Why don't we get started? Let's go back to the 90s, back in the 90s, and talk a little bit about social validity. Usually we do that definition like social validity is, but I think in discussing this article, we will come back to the topic of what social validity is and is not.
Do you know what I love about going back to the 90s is that we all currently are wearing the clothes that we wore when we were in the 90s. Not right now, but we all own pieces of clothing now that trended from the 90s. Like Diana has her Doc Marten Mary Janes. I've got my wide leg jeans and my flannels. Like I am myself in the 90s, and it's like so amazing.
It's really quite perfect timing, I think, because when you are our age, you give up on trying to do any type of current trends and just go back to what's comfortable for you. But it just happens to be that what's comfortable for us is back in style.
So winning.
Oh, are video game t-shirts you got for free at your retail job, are they back in style yet?
And those were never in style.
I think that's the only thing I own that I got at any point in the 90s.
You
I don't
keep
have
wearing what
else.
you wear.
All right.
Yeah. Cargo pants, I guess, are back.
I have some cargo shorts I don't want to get rid of.
I already got rid of all your cargo shorts.
I have one pair left because I like the extra pockets.
Anyway,
all right. So yeah, Schwartz and Bear, 1991. Eileen Schwartz is the GOAT. We've already talked about Don Bears.
We did this bit already.
Back in the day, but this article, it is, I think, very good.
It made me feel bad. It made me feel bad about social validity.
Yeah.
Like I thought I understood it, and then I read this article and said, I don't think I have the inkling of what social validity really is supposed to be.
That's why I want to talk about. That's why I brought this back as a whole new and additional topic, right? So for context, we did an episode already on social validity. I have a hard time with that word. And it's episode 90. So I'm like giving away my pairings already. And in that article, we reviewed Wolf 1978, right? Which I believe many listeners are probably familiar with. It's where we talk about how behavior analysis is finding its heart, right? And I truly love that article. I reference it a lot.
Unlike most people who hate it.
It's a darn good article. And in that article, you can go back and listen to our episode on it, right? But also, I can summarize it quickly here for you now, because the components of it are highly relevant for the discussion today. And in that article, Wolf gets himself, tangled up and then untangled from the idea that should we be worried that social validity is ultimately a subjective measure, right? So, we're behavioral science, right? We're obviously tied into data and objective analysis, observation and measurement. And we all agree that social validity is important and we want to be doing things that are, meaningful for our clients. But if the best way we have for measuring that is this subjective thing where we kind of ask people how they think/feel about something, that's really hard to measure. So are we okay with that? Do we want to throw the whole idea away? Or can we come to a group consensus that there are times in which an ultimately subjective measure is also an important variable in the clinical application of our science? And he and then the rest of the field also are all in agreement. Yes, this is something that is important. We recognize that it has a subjective quality to it, but where our science is not anything if it's not applicable. And we can only determine if it's applicable or meaningful, right, via these types of subjective analyses. So we're okay with the idea. The other main takeaway from this article, at least for me, is that Wolf really breaks social validity down into these three main areas. And the three areas in which we want to be assessing social validity, again, I think these are highly, highly relevant for folks today. And we're going to review them, but also then dig deeper into what social validity means. Because I know I'm getting to the article I'm actually talking about here in just 1 second. But in the Wolf article, we have three areas that social validity should be covering. First of all, does everyone who is involved agree with the selection of goals and objectives that we have for the consumer/client? So are they going to be socially meaningful and significant? 2, the means by which we are planning to teach these particular skills, goals, objectives. are we all in agreement that those methods are socially valid? Because you can have a good goal, but the way that you get to that goal, everyone may not like. And then 3, are we and everyone who is involved satisfied with the overall outcome that results from the intervention that we're providing? Because you can like the goals, like the process, but if you're not happy with the overall outcome, then something is still missing here, right? So social validity is way, way, way more than just, I passed a questionnaire on to my parents at the end of this study and asked them if they were satisfied, right? Generically satisfied.
It's like the end of Big Hero 6 with that Baymax robot where you just ask, are you satisfied with your care?
Are you satisfied with your care?
And if they say yes, it's like, okay, great, I'm leaving.
He deflates right in front of you. Yeah, so it's a more complex idea than that. So that's what Wolf gave us in 78, right? And then Schwartz and Bear followed that up in 91. Here is a fun fact. 1991 was twice as close to 1978 as the period of time that we are in now.
Wow.
I know. Just blew your mind.
I hate it when people do that because I feel like I'm still very young.
I'm sorry. It was over 30 years ago that this article was written. But like I said, I found it pretty mind-blowing and I had not thought about some of these aspects before. And again, that's why I wanted to bring it up to everyone's attention. So I kind of want to start us off with just a few quotes from the article because I just can't say things as well as they are saying it in this article. And they're just hitting it on all cylinders here. So
to be fair, you are not either of those two authors, right?
No.
You're close.
Yeah.
You're very close.
I mean, I assigned both of them GOAT status already. Yeah. So,
In your defense, too, you were a child when they wrote this. So it's not like you could have written this. And now they already wrote it. So you can't rewrite it.
That. Yeah, you were a child.
Some years on me.
Lad.
Less. Okay, so I'm going to start us off with this quote from page 190, in which they talk about social validity assessments and the ways in which they should be a lot more complex and in-depth than how we typically think of them with this questionnaire thing. So they say a useful social validity assessment should not A, assess the opinions of a limited or the wrong community, B, incorrectly assess the opinions of the relevant community, or C, assess the opinions of the relevant community correctly, but not use that information to change the program and or its consumer's opinion about it. In short, it is as inappropriate to sample criticism and praise and not respond to it as it is to respond to it without investigating its sources and its correlates, meaning its accuracy. Mm-hmm. Okay? So they're taking us all to task here by saying just, casually checking in with folks every once in a while and saying, how do you think things are going? Do you think things are going good? Good. I thought you would. Is not going to cut it. There is more to this. And it may be that we're asking the wrong population, right? We're asking the wrong questions, or we're not heeding what the evidence states when we do actually manage to collect it accurately. Which brings our authors to another idea called social invalidity. All right. So, of course, social validity should have a counterpart, right? Which is when our consumers and their communities find some type of treatment or program invalid. And they give us a definition of that as well. So they said, Baer in 1987 described social invalidity as the behaviors of consumers who not only disapprove of some component in the ongoing program, but are going to do something about their disapproval. That something may include withdrawing from the program, encouraging others to do the same, complaining to community officials in the media, or, more subtly, not implementing some or all of the program's procedures after the program consultant leaves, despite positive responses on questionnaires. All right. So I feel like this component is also quite relevant and timely for our discussion today, right? Because it could be argued that we see more evidence of these types of responses indicating invalidity social invalidity of some components of programs, right? And just as we're happy when we hear validity, we should be responsive and humble and open to hearing about invalidity within our programs. But if we're not checking for it in the right ways, we're never going to know.
I love that. And I think it's especially important for researchers to hear that.
Yeah.
Because a lot of the times with researchers, they might not be participant focused in the way that we'd want them to be, right? They're more question focused and treatment driven in a way. They're like, does this work? But it's okay if it works, but does it also meet the requirements of, the community that is receiving the treatment? Do they agree or not? Right. So when we talk about social validity, I think it's really important for researchers to hear that, not only clinicians too, but when we're talking about research articles. So I just wanted to put that out there.
Yeah, absolutely. And this article talks a lot. I think it's talking mostly from a perspective of evaluating your practitioner-based programs, but it's equally important in both arenas. It's just that we usually only have evidence with which to talk about research-based social validity, but it should be happening across domains, let's say. All right, so they go on to say that measuring social invalidity can be quite difficult based on the types of social validity measures that we usually provide to consumers. And we really need to be gathering good, truthful, and accurate reporting on how people really feel about the programs and interventions that we're providing in order to know what we're doing well and knowing what we are not doing well, and then responding to that. So they said, what are some things that this is kind of like, what are outside of social validity and invalidity? So they said, like, what is it not, basically? Oh my gosh. And here's just one more quote because I just can't help it. They said the meaning for social validity has been, quote, burgeoned beyond usefulness and into confusion. Oh, it's just great. I just love that quote because that's probably true. We're using social validity in lots of different ways. And when one does that, then you start to water down the potential meaning for it. But really what we should be doing with social validity is detecting unacceptability, because it's intended to be like a line of defense, right? Not just a line of validation. And I think that's how it tends to get used. Like, oh, you like this, right? Great. I'm glad I'm on the right track. But and I think, they talk about this too, that when the concept of social validity was introduced, a lot of people then just kind of like added it on, like, okay, this is another dependent variable that I want to ensure I'm meeting, right? And in doing so, it's likely that information about the social invalid components of our research and or our practices gets swept under the rug, just like any other research outcomes that were not ideal. Those things don't get published, right? So it's the same possibility that could be happening here with social validity if we're just treating it as another dependent variable. And in doing so, we're like afraid to get bad reviews, right? In the social validity compartment. Of course, we want to have socially valid and meaningful programs, but getting feedback that something is invalid should just spur us on to make things better. And if we're not getting that feedback, then we're never going to be able to make those types of changes. They talked about the pressures that individuals may feel to say that they like a program, right? There's always a power dynamic there between parents and clinicians or researchers and participants. And when we are not giving them, the freedom and space in which to respond fully and truthfully, then likely people are just saying what they think the other person wants to hear. And so you're getting good validity scores, but what meaning do they really have? They also said, one more quote, applied behavior analysis simply cannot be that good. If every article is just like, yep, social validity was great, 7 out of 7, chances are we're not really getting to the heart of what's going on. They said that trying to determine programs' failings or rejection needs to occur so that we can make sure that we're asking the right questions to the right population. And this is kind of reflected from that earlier quote that they had too. So this is really important on multiple levels First of all, we should be sampling the relevant people who are affected by the program. Even this we don't always do a good job of, right? So I'll come back to that in a minute. And then number 2, if the program is intended to have an impact on society at large, they also kind of call into question, like, what's the population sampling look like? And what effect does that have on our expectations for validity? And they said it's often the case where, in terms of, large scale movements or change, the social validity of those movements initially is quite low with the general population. So they talked about like civil rights movement or women's rights. Those don't always have a lot of traction initially, but many people would argue, especially looking back on history, that those were obviously socially significant movements. So that is another component here if we're trying to scale up our social validity assessments. Depending on the size of the population you're trying to gain traction with, social validity may be the right measure, but it may actually not be the right measure. So they said, okay, we all agree it's important. Maybe we're not assessing it very well. How should we actually assess it instead? Our authors say we need to properly identify the consumers of the program so we know who we're asking the questions to. So they give us a breakdown. We have direct consumers, people who are experiencing the program, indirect consumers, those who are likely paying for / hiring on behalf of the people who are benefiting or experiencing the program. Then we have members of the immediate community, so those who have interaction with direct and indirect consumers of the program, like people who are in their schools or community outing sports events, right, or church. And then we have members of the extended community, so those that share a community but don't necessarily interact with the consumer. So depending on what the scale of the assessment is going to include how many layers of that consumer population. But first and foremost, of course, we should be assessing the direct consumers, the people who are receiving the services. That does not always happen. In terms of conducting social validity assessments, we have to think about, okay, if this is important and we really want to gain access to truthful information about the social validity of what we're doing with our direct consumers or indirect consumers, how can we do a better job than just giving people a questionnaire, which really and truly may not be meaningful, and or maybe we're getting, false information based on kind of like peer pressure situation. So they gave us some ideas of what to do. They said we could measure the affect of the direct consumers via an operationally defined scale that could assess their emotional responsiveness to the intervention. Jackie, I know you like indices of happiness.
I love indices of happiness.
You can't see her, but she's smiling. Right? I'm seeing some indices.
It's not always smiling though. It could be shouting with glee. It could be sparkling eyes. All these things can be objectively defined and measured.
Right. How much sparkle? You gotta set up a measurement system for that.
The sparkle hits 2 meters away.
Anyway, I thought of you with that one, of course, right?
Absolutely.
So that's number 1. And that's one that we have talked about in other capacities. Number 2, allow consumers to choose between 2 interventions. Yes. Okay. That's also one that we're familiar with. I will note, though, that they referenced a 1986 article for this. So this was before the concurrent operance arrangement research that we are perhaps more familiar with today. Next up, they said you could assess the different rates in which the target behavior occurs in the natural environment in order to kind of determine like what would be an optimal rate and use that information to inform your decisions. And I think this one is really more in terms of like goal selection, right? That aspect of social validity. I would just caution people to, be careful with this one, and that we don't want to just be teaching towards some typical norm, because that may not be appropriate for our client. But that's an idea. Number 4 was to ask what they called competent performers of the target behavior. So I guess like people who know what they're doing, to take a look at some type of permanent product resulting from the intervention to see if they felt like that outcome seemed meaningful to the individual. Again, we're just throwing out ideas. And then finally, they said maybe people could take a look at pre and post video samples and see if they noted a meaningful difference. So again, some of them are operating in the direct consumer level, but some of them are trying to pull in the wider community, extended community, which I think is fine. It just depends on, again, like what the audience is that seem to be the goal audience, right? So clearly we need more data on social validity. And even though this article was written 30 years ago, that has not changed that very much. Just to give you some stats, I'm just going to jump over. I'm not reviewing the Ferguson et al. Article in detail, but just know that they did a thorough bean counting study of Java articles over, for them, it was like the 20-year range prior to publication of that article, and looking to see how many total studies were presented and what percentage of those reported social validity data. So the low point number was in the year 2000, only about 4% of articles were reporting social validity data. The high point was 2006, but it was only about 25%. And then let's say the last 3 data points, we'll use that to determine if there's a trend. They were at a pretty much stable level of articles reporting social validity data around 18%. So these numbers are low. In fact, they are lower than when Schwartz did this in 1991. She found 29% of articles were reporting social validity data. So maybe there are more articles coming out now, right? But percentage-wise, it looks roughly the same or lower than it was 30 years ago. So this is an ongoing issue. Not to mention, even when social validity data are being reported, they still contain all of these traps, and stipulations that I just noted, right? So any of those could be just a simple questionnaire that's perhaps directed at the wrong audience and not gaining us information that will actually make our practices better, which is the point of the Schwartz and Baer article. So they said, what can we do to try to make our assessments better within the context of how they currently look? They recommend doing some improved construction of the social validity assessments, such as give people more to work with. So a 3-point scale is going to give you very little information. A 7-point scale is better. Ideally, these questionnaires should involve differential responding by the consumers. They should specify a period of time that you're asking about the practice in. They should address all the aspects of the acceptability and the viability of the program. So not just like, did you like this, right? But really getting into detail. They should ask the consumer's opinion, the direct consumer's opinion. And I know that there are ways to do that, but it does take time, intentionality, and patience to do so. That's all the more reason why we should be dedicating additional research and practice toward it. And finally, you should be as specific as possible when you're creating these questionnaires. Rob will talk more about this later. And they said, keep looking at what additional objective techniques could be used in order to determine social validity. So maybe I'm actually just going to, this is a quote as well. So they said, let's try to figure out, is there proof that the program's goals and outcomes are themselves valid? Are there ways in which we can do unobtrusive measurement, such as recidivism rates, accidents, which is like for like a OBM type of thing, right? Or levels of complaint. Those would be examples of unobtrusive measurement. Can we identify and measure the behavioral precursors for satisfaction and dissatisfaction, such as attendance or engagement in the intervention? And can we provide consumers with experiences, I love this one, from different program options and then allow them to choose? And I love that one because it is direct consumer related. So they give us a lot of ideas, but as I said, a lot of this is still kind of an open question with regard to how are we going to address social validity in a way that's meaningful. Okay.
Boom.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I know, right?
Such a impactful article.
I do not remember reading this article prior.
Me neither.
No.
But it's really so.
Yeah.
It's now in my favorites folder.
It's a good one. So now
it's got little hearts drawn on it.
Now that we have discussed what is missing and should be included in a discussion of social validity, we're going to take a little break, and when we come back, we'll look a little bit more at how we can accomplish these things. We'll be right back.
Do you want to be a BCBA?
Sure, we all do.
Now you can come to Regis College in Weston, Mass. to get your graduate degree.
Choose from any one of these courses.
Masters of Science in Applied Behavior Analysis.
Masters of Science in Special Education.
Dual degree in Special Ed and ABA.
Or be eligible for your postmaster's certificate.
You can complete your degree and be ready to sit for the exam in 2 years. And our 2017 grads had a 100% pass rate on the BACB exam.
Come enjoy practicum placement support, ethics mini handbooks, PhD-level professors, small class sizes, and a service trip to Iceland.
If interested, don't delay. Supplies are limited. Learn more at regiscollege.edu.
Again, that's www.regiscollege.edu, regiscollege.edu. One more time, www.regiscollege.edu. See you there!
And we are back talking about assessing social validity. But before we continue our conversation, I want to remind our listeners that ABA Inside Track is ACE and QAVA approved, and by listening, you're able to earn 1 learning credit. All you need to do is finish listening, then go to our website, abainsidetrack.com, or click the link in your podcast player. And once there, you can enter in some important information, including 2 secret code words that we've put in the episode. I'll tell you the first one now, and the second one at a different time. The first one is Cupid, C-U-P-I-D. Cupid. He's the little Greek demigod that's always naked and shooting people with arrows and stuff. Did you ever see that Supernatural episode?
No.
Where I think it was Cupid or somebody came to town.
No.
Oh, it was really gross. It was like, I think the grossest one I'd ever seen. It was like really cute. It was about this like couple.
And they were going on is the episode I tapped down on.
They were going on a date, and like they were been so lonely, and they'd been away from me. You know, they hadn't seen anyone in a long time, and they go on this cute date, and it's like, what is Supernatural show about 2 brothers who are like best friends, and they go out and fight vampires and stuff.
They're very handsome.
Never saw it.
They're very handsome. And this couple's going on a date, and it's like a long date, and it's like so cute watching like them develop these characters. And I'm like, who are these like new characters we're being introduced to at the beginning of the episode of Supernatural? Because they're just going on some cute date. And then they go back to apartment and they start kissing. And then they're clearly getting like more and more passionate. You're like, I don't know what's happening. Is one of werewolf or something? And then
the brothers?
No, the brothers aren't there yet. They come later.
Okay. I thought the brothers were
this
kissing.
couple. No, then they start like making out, and then they start biting each other, and then they eat each other because I think Cupid has come to town and has made everyone fall in love with things too much, and it's like too intense. I can't remember if it was Cupid or not, but I just remember that being like the grossest episode of Supernatural, and that show was on for 100 years.
I never saw it.
Well,
that was the episode I stopped watching.
And you're like, I don't want to watch Supernatural anymore. It was intense. Like it was a lot. It was like really sad. It was like a really good how to do horror. It's nothing to do with social validity or our code word Cupid. Well, I guess it did have to do with our code word Cupid.
Code word Cupid.
But not that much. I just felt like telling a story. I don't know why. Anyway.
All right, well, there you go.
That's why people tune in, right? Because they're like, I wish someone would talk about Supernatural more on this behavior analytic podcast.
I love that.
And I did. So there you go. 5 stars.
I'm not going to talk about Supernatural.
No. Well, you shouldn't. The time for that has passed.
I'm going to continue our discussion on social validity for realsies. And my article really looked at all of the procedures that have been classified as evidence-based practices and looked at whether the evidence-based practices that have been labeled as evidence-based also have some social validity measures with them. And so I love the opening line of this article. It's like, even though research is emerging with autism, right, autism intervention, we no longer have to ask what we should do because there's a lot of things that have already had a robust research experience behind them showing us that there are effective outcomes. I just like that. I just like that they start. I don't know. I was like, ooh, I'm excited to read this article. It is a little dense. I'm just going to let everyone know it is kind of a denser article.
They commit one of, I think, the cardinal sins of article writing, which is get your acronyms out in like the first couple pages and then have a lot of pages where you just keep using them. Like, you all know these acronyms. Don't worry about it.
There are a lot of acronyms. Yep. And I'm going to talk about it is hard to read those, but it is a worthy article. And so they stress that interventions have been identified in these larger scale studies that demonstrate effectiveness across many outcome areas. And there have been some organizations that have really taken the stage for these types of initiatives. They are the National Autism Center, NAC, that's one acronym, and the National Standards Project, which is NSP, so close. And
are there any more N-related acronyms that we should know of, Jackie?
Yes, there is. And there's another platform that does similar efforts, and they're called the National Professional Development Center of Autism Spectrum Disorder, or NPDC.
It rolls off the tongue.
Nope.
Yep, we've got
too many N-related acronyms.
To be honest, you don't really see NAC very much anymore, the National Autism Center. We really focus on the National Standards Project, which is NSP, and the National Professional Development Center on Autism Spectrum Disorders, NPDC. Good thing they have an acronym for that one, though, because that one's pretty long. And what those agencies have done is they've generated a list of evidence-based practices that have been shown to be effective with autistic individuals. So the NPDC has a list of 24 evidence-based practices that they say, yes, there is research to support this, either emerging or established, and 18 of those were also identified by NSP, the National Standards Project. So we see some good overlap with evidence-based practice. And so what they make a very, very important claim that we've all seen as practitioners, that even though something is effective and evidence-based, doesn't mean people are automatically going to start using them because there's evidence, right? We've seen this.
I thought you showed people data and they said, oh, well, now that you have data, I'll do that thing. And then they did it forevermore and everyone was happy. And they put a 7 on their Likert scale, or 1, depending on where your Likert scale goes.
Right. It's not always that accurate. So really, effectiveness is not enough for widespread implementation, even if it's required by law, which it is, right? Because we should all, according to No Child Left Behind Act, we should be, in the Disabilities Act, we should be using things that are evidence-based practice. But that's not always the case. And what we have seen is that practices that haven't been demonstrated to be effective are still implemented for a variety of reasons, right? Because they have always been implemented, because they're easy, they're cost-effective, right? There's a lot of reasons why studies that haven't been demonstrated to be effective are still being used. Another reason might be that educators, parents, professionals, all of the educators involved, right, not just behavior analysts, this wasn't a behavior analytic article per se, is that there might not be a lot of knowledge around evidence-based practice. There might be limited training around evidence-based practice, what it means, what it doesn't mean, right? A lot of the times evidence-based practice are costly. And so agencies or school districts might not have the resources or the planning and preparation time to implement evidence-based practice into their daily life. And the authors also, they slip it in here. I love it when they slip it out here. Social validity may also be a factor, right? And they say, just like Wolf said, social validity can generally be defined as consumer satisfaction with the goals, procedures, and outcomes of the programs and interventions. And without that social validity, evidence-based practice may actually not be implemented in natural settings, because even though it's effective, it may not be socially valid to our consumers, to the, to whoever's running it. And so this is something that we should really look into. So Ray Chow and colleagues looked at 7 characteristics for social validation. And it's important that I'm going to tell you these 7 because they come back to them in the secondary analysis. So,
okay.
Yeah.
This is like a Chekhov's gun list.
Yep. Number 1, socially important dependent variable. That makes sense. Number 2, time and cost effective. Number 3, there's a comparison between those with a disability and those without a disability. I like that one. That one I had not necessarily heard before. Number 4, clinically significant behavior change. Number 5, consumers are satisfied with the results. Number 6, here's another one that I love. The independent variable is manipulated by people that the consumer would naturally come in contact with. So not the experimenter, right? Someone that's going to be in their natural environment. And number 7, it's occurring in a natural context. So I love those 7 characteristics. Those come back in a little bit. I was like, ooh, why are they telling me this? And then they told me why. So previous research looked at something called the ideal model, which I had not heard of before. And the ideal model talks about things that are individualized, database decision-making, empirically demonstrated interventions, there's active collaborations, and long-term outcomes. Ideal.
I like that.
I do too. And so that is the ideal model has components of social validity throughout each of their little, what are they called? Characteristics, components. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah. Okay.
And so previous research looked at whether ABA, the teach method, both or neither had these components of the ideal model, right, with the social validity scale. And yes, they did. Both of them did. But in previous research, they found that teach actually had slightly more social validity components than ABA did. So we needed to do better there. But in another study, which our friend and former colleague Chada Dixon looked at social validity with the core skills assessment in 2014 and asked parents what they thought was important for their child to learn. And so this is not a new thing to look at social validity, right? As you said, too, in the 90s. And so what the authors say is that now that we know that there are evidence-based practices out there, why don't we now take a look at social validity with those implementations so that it is easier to identify which autism interventions and treatment components are going to be better accessible for parents and colleagues and teachers and professionals, right? And so then we can create this list of interventions that are not only evidence-based practice, but also socially valid. So that's what they want.
EVP, if you want another acronym.
Nope.
I know. So many acronyms. There's a lot of acronyms. I think that's why it was only 10 pages long and there was 2 pages of table.
Big tables, yeah.
Big tables. But it did feel like a very long article. I texted Diana and I was like, I'm still reading.
It had you sweating.
Okay. So they did 2 analyses. So this is not a single subject design. Had the preliminary analysis where they wanted to look at to see if there was any components of the ideal model with these evidence-based practices on the list of the National Standards Project and the National Professional Development Center of Autism Spectrum Disorders, right? So I love they have 3 researchers that are doing this work. And they say a lot of experience. They've got experience in autism and university-based teaching and graduate program. They have like a ton of experience. So I just said a lot of experience. They had 60 components of the evidence-based practice, and they wrote them. They sent out a survey to 187 parents, teachers, and special educators and asked them to categorize if they thought these were socially valid or not, right? So they wanted to also make note that the treatments that they sent out were categorized as emerging or established. So the National Standards Project had treatments that were counted as emerging, and the minimum requirements there is that they had 1 group design or 2 single subject design replications with a minimum of 6 participants, no conflicting results, and beneficial treatment effects for at least 1 target behavior. So that's important to know. And so the surveyors rated each component on a Likert scale, 1 to 7, So that's good. They listened to the previous articles, right, saying that they shouldn't do 1 to 3, but they should do 1 to 7. And they took the components of the ideal model and compared those with the NSP and NPDC list to find common treatments that were identified. And they luckily found that 23 of the 24 treatments aligned directly with the ideal model on at least one or more social validation ideal components. Phew, right? So that means, in a nutshell, that most of the evidence-based practices that these two agencies have found to be either established or emerging did have at least some component of social validation in there, right? So few, right?
Good.
So 31 ideal model components aligned directly with the EBP, but usually it was just one. Some had two. So the visual schedule had two components, which I liked. Then they wanted to do expert validation. So they had 7 experts in the field were sent this survey and asked to validate what they just found. And they had a 99.6% agreement. Only one of them did not agree on what the survey said. So that's pretty good. Then they decided to do a secondary analysis, and they expanded this research team to consist of the original members and 4 additional PhD level research. And they reviewed all 828 articles cited within the 2 agencies. Can you believe that? That is a lot of articles.
That is a lot of articles.
So what they wanted to do here is they wanted to see whether the authors directly assessed social validity and to identify the types of social validity reported according to those 7 characteristics of Rachel. Remember, I wanted to bring us back to that?
Yep.
So
it's back.
It came back. So they looked at the headings, they looked at direct evidence of social validation, and then they assigned information to one or more of those 7 characteristics or the 7 components. So we out of the 828 articles, no surprise, only 201 articles were coded with the social validation component, so 24%. Basically, we're seeing the same in 2017 as we saw in 1991.
Yep.
Right? So that's pretty fascinating. They had very high agreement when one or more of the researchers said, yes, there's a social validity component, or no, there wasn't. So several social validated interventions were classified as emerging. 4 were established evidence-based practice. 4 established evidence-based practice had more than one ideal model component. So the real winner here was the antecedent-based intervention. That corresponded to 6 practices within the ideal model, and reinforcement behavioral packages were supported by only 3 practices. So what they looked at is to see then where people mostly identified social validity. And what they found is that most of the time, the most percentage of articles that looked at social validity were the consumers satisfied with the results. Then they looked at that 73% of the articles. 48% of the articles looked at whether the dependent variable was socially important and whether it was the clinically significant behavior change. That's not surprising. Nobody's surprising. No one's surprised by that, right? And then we see a very huge drop in percentage when we're looking at like time and cost effective. Only 27% of the articles looked at whether the evidence-based practice was time and cost effective. Only 11% did that comparison between those with disabilities and those without. And only 19% looked at if it was in a natural context or not. And the final one was 17% was the IV manipulated by people in typical contact and not the researcher, right? So they had some funny kind of outcomes. I guess not funny, but they were like, phew, there is social validity in when we're looking at these evidence-based practices, but not a ton, right?
Yeah.
So we need a lot more work on social validity. Especially, they said, on those like kind of strongholds that are on our field, such as discrete trial training, differential reinforcement, extinction. They said that there wasn't a ton of social validity in those articles. So that might be something that we should be looking to do. And that other fields, such as the teach method, had more components of social validity in their procedures than ABA did. And so that's something that we should, be moving toward. They do make the caveat that it's really still important, though, to assess whether it's effective, right? We can't lose the science for looking at social validity, right? But we can look at them together in a way that's meaningful, that it's effective and socially valid. So they were like, phew, but let's do more work. And the table 1, if everyone wants to look at this article, tells you all of the evidence-based practices and articles, all 826 of them almost.
Some light reading.
Light reading.
Yeah. Amazing. Okay.
All right. Well,
cool. Thanks, Jackie.
One last article to discuss, and that is Anderson and colleagues looking at where do we get these social validity questionnaires, specifically in ABA? Because certainly knowing why we want to have social validity be a component of our treatments is important. But if you don't know how to get that information, you're not really going to meet those goals. So this is going to include being able to, like we've talked about, you need to be able to ask the relevant people, the relevant communities, these questions. They need to be questions that are relevant to the individuals around, say, was the treatment effective? How effective, right? Those are some of the questions that may or may not be relevant. And then you're going to be able to make sure that you are asking questions in a way that can then be replicable so that you can use those questions to sort of predict, and the results of those questions to then predict, is this treatment going to have social validity both at the beginning and then throughout the treatment process, as opposed to the way we often see it, which is we did a treatment, then we did a social validity questionnaire, the scores were good, ergo, this procedure now has social validity deigned upon it, which is not really the point of social validity. So the question now is, all right, well, we have all these goals. How do we do that in a way that is semi-standardized so more people can use social validity measurements, but also in ways that are meaningful? It can't be that easy, can it? Like, we're not just going to ask the same stock questions of, did you like the treatment? Would you recommend the treatment to friends and colleagues? And please rate on a score of 1 to 7. Do you think it was good? Right? And that's usually what we see in social validity. Just, it's the same kind of questions over and over and over again. And if you thought that was going to be the entirety of the article, no, it would be a very short article if that were the case. And certainly for me, I was really drawn to this article because when I try to do social validity, I typically do what I'm sure many of us do, which is I look at recent articles I've read that I really liked their social validity questionnaire, and I use modified questions based on what they had in there about how they like the treatment, would they recommend the treatment, do they think the treatment was effective, do they think the training was useful, and I slap on a 1 to 7 Likert scale, and I call it a day. And then I hope I get good results.
Man, you love slapping on Likert scales.
You can do it anytime. Just slap it on a Likert scale.
Put a bird on it.
Yep. Always works. Always works.
I like having the high end of the scale be the good end.
Yes. You want a high number?
Yeah.
See, I like number 1. It's better than 7. 7 just sounds like blech.
No, I agree with Diana.
Yeah.
Well, so that's a real failure in our Likert scale system. How can we standardize
everyone
this?
needs to use the same system, because have you ever gotten it back when someone scored all 1s and 1 was the low, and you're like, is it actually that you thought this was the most terrible thing you've ever experienced, or did you think it was the best thing you've ever experienced, and vice versa? Mm-hmm. So we all need to be in agreement. I think we should pick my side.
Oh, okay. Sounds great.
Okay, great. That's solved.
So typically what we see is these kind of bespoke social validity questionnaires created just for a study. And there are some that you can get from standardized assessments. So the authors bring up the treatment evaluation inventory for problem behaviors, the intervention rating profile 20, the abbreviated acceptability rating profile, the behavior intervention rating scale, the scale of treatment perception. Scale of treatment perception being the only questionnaire that's developed as a standardized social validity measure for treatments used to increase desired behaviors. Everything else is kind of for the decrease, or you just kind of slap it on and hope for the best. And
so
again,
there are places you can start.
Yes.
If you are looking for something.
But the limit to these is we don't know where these questions came from, meaning you don't know that these standardized questionnaires are relevant for the intervention that you are looking to get social validity information about, or the population with whom you are trying to implement this treatment. So how was this originally developed? How was this validated? And I don't think that's a great question. I don't think I've ever seen anyone tell me this is how we came up with this social validity questionnaire. It's just a questionnaire and you read it and you're like, I guess that seems good.
Yeah.
It's better than nothing, right? The authors then bring up the point of, well, if we really wanted to come up with, the best social validity questionnaires that deal with these real problems about how we measure or don't measure social validity, you could try some open-ended questions rather than Likert scales. The challenge here is while you would then get more impactful information from the clients and you might see less bias in terms of the use of the questionnaire, it's also going to be very hard to then aggregate all of that information that you get in this narrative form into data that you can then easily publish or share with other individuals. So we got a problem. We need to be able to study, have good questionnaires that come from meaningful sources that we know when we give them will both give us information about the, how well liked the treatment was and give us a sense of predictive validity of if we get low scores on this treatment's not going to work. Let's find that out as early as possible rather than only wait until the end to know this information of like, thanks for your treatment. I guess it was good. I hate it and we'll never use it. It's like, wow, it was a great use of everybody's time, I'm sure.
Schwartz and Bear talked about that a good bit too. And I think I forgot to bring that up, but they said you really have to assess early. Otherwise, something has been going on that everyone hated this whole time, and that's not useful.
Much like voting for a crooked politician, you want to vote early and often.
No comment.
Okay. So the authors say, all right, let's do this. What if we did open-ended questionnaires for a group of individuals who had either are going through or just finished going through a treatment? That would give us a robust group of information, which we then could use to create a more standardized Likert scale-esque social validity questionnaire. So therefore, we have information that's relevant, that should matter in terms of measuring social validity, and then we can put it in a format that could be used again with a similar population doing a similar treatment in the future. Sounds like a lot of work, but at the same time, if we really want to meet a goal of meaningful social validity measurements, we probably need to do this work. So now the question becomes, all right, well, how will we do that? And so they decided, well, first they're going to start with the open-ended questionnaires, and I'll talk a little bit about that. And then we're going to use two different methods to see which one produces sort of the best results across a number of measures, which are, we'll do a thematic analysis and we'll do a textual analysis. So I'm going to go into sort of what the questionnaires were. So again, this was done with a group of caregivers who had just had their children go through pediatric feeding treatment. The treatment itself and some of the results from the questionnaire is not really important for what we're talking about today, because the goal again was to just find, are there themes within the answers that could then be used to generate a Likert scale that could be used for similar caregivers or similar groups doing similar treatments in the future.
Our goal is generality.
Exactly. So they started with a semi-structured interview, individually talking to the caregivers, talking about the goals, the procedures, the outcomes of treatment, unpredicted effects of the treatments. And they used open-ended questions. They used lots of probes to encourage the use of a lot of detail. Oh, okay, why or why not was that the case? They were about an hour long, these interviews they did. Lots of nodding and expressing agreement, asking for clarification. So they got all this rich information. Then they transcribed it all. Then they did a thematic analysis and a textual analysis. A thematic analysis was based on work by Braun and Clark from 2006, which pretty much just was you look through the transcription, and as you go through, you have these codes that note this sounds important. So again, you might see a phrase from a caregiver, quote, I was thinking that maybe after a year that my kid would start eating. It wasn't that easy, end quote. And then you'd code that as progress was slow. Again, they try to use like very small, like only a couple words. They then take all these codes and they group them into themes around some central idea that you could sum up in a sentence. So you take these very like 3-word sort of summary phrases, group them into central ideas that you could say into a phrase. So example for, the it wasn't that easy, progress was slow. You have a lot of similar themes. A lot of similar little codes. You put in the theme of how parents felt about the time frame of the intervention. They'd usually find like 2 or 6 themes, and then they give them like a name, like this is this category. So that's a thematic analysis. And so people had to kind of go into the information and do that themselves. The textual analysis was a little bit easier in that they used software. to just say, hey, software, find the words that are all kind of related. They all have a similar meaning, or they have a similar mood, or they're in a similar grammatical function within the sentence. And these different groups they called references. If you
Make a word cloud.
Pretty much, yeah, kind of like a word cloud, right? You see a couple references that are close together in a text, then you'd say, okay, those must have some relation. And this is the software would do that. Take all of these references that the software generated, and you see, okay, how many times did they co-occur for any given question that we asked? And that would also allow us to kind of take a couple references that appear in the data multiple times. Those will be our themes that we generate from our textual analysis. So for example, if you see the word support and you see references to the school, that would come up with a theme. Okay, we see those a lot coming together. That's the special support needed at school theme. Then they did some iterator agreement analyses where they sort of looked at the themes that related to kind of the same multiple objects and actions, that refer to names, which wouldn't necessarily be relevant, references that came in because people, when they're talking, often say the same word over and over again. So it doesn't have the same weight because they're kind of gathering their thoughts. So they did all this so they were able to get these themes across these two different methods. They had a second analyst replicate all these methods to see, okay, what's the same? Do I agree? Do I disagree with the first rater? They had additional independent raters looking at all the number of agreements and disagreements in theme. So it was all big production because, again, you're sort of using these mildly bespoke means of, is this a theme? You're kind of baking some of that up to some extent based on either kind of your sense as a reader or the software sense of how often are the same words used over and over and over again. So they did all this together. They had a secondary theme similarity rater, they had a special job, where they'd have a list of all the themes that were generated. And then they had to draw lines between the themes that matched between the two different styles. But you can only do one line per theme, right? And then they had some formula that was like really long. It looked like I was reading a calculus book that would calculate agreement to look at, okay, which of these methods produced the best agreement across all our raters. They then took all this information and they made 2 questionnaires based on either the thematic or textual analysis. You had like 23 or 22 items. It depended on which analysis you were doing. They rephrased half of them to be the negative version of it. So some were positively phrased, some were negatively phrased to reduce a bias, response bias. And then they randomized which parent got which questionnaire. And then they slapped on their Likert scale and they said, here, I know we asked you all these questions. We'd love you to do the same thing pretty much, except for this more standardized questionnaire. We also want you to agree or disagree with each statement as to whether you think this is a relevant question to my understanding of your treatment, and this is easy for me to understand. So again, it's not helpful if these methods generate questions that make no sense. They then did some statistics. They did like a t-test looking at content validity questions, all these validity analyses and stuff, because again, you want to know which one was, quote unquote, the best of these different methods. So results. The different analyses, of course, found different themes per question. Some of the questions sort of resulted in the same themes being developed. The textual analysis found, in general, more theme per question. And again, across questions found less coherence. So again, the themes didn't seem to repeat across the questions. I'm not going to go into what the themes were because it's not really relevant to the discussion. They saw more differentiation between themes when the raters were looking at them using the thematic analysis and the textual analysis. And some of this seems to make kind of, there's face validity there of like, well, the computer looked at the words. Of course, you're going to see these same patterns. Where when humans do it, they're going to be, there's going to be more bias. There's going to be a little less reliability because you're asking people to do this task that is a little bit subjective. A lot subjective. However, you did also then find that with those social validity questionnaires that were developed, the participants, they didn't disagree too much across which one was, quote unquote, better than the other. They agreed with a number of statements from the themes from both methods. Thematic analysis, they tended to agree a little bit more with, I think these are important questions in the textual analysis, but like not significantly more. There really didn't seem to be a difference between methods. Again, there were like small differences in numbers in terms of, I think this is more relevant in the thematic analysis type questions than the textual analysis questions. It was like 96 versus 91%. So again, very small differences, nothing really big. Textual analysis did seem more reliable as a method to generate themes. Again, because just like, like we talked about, when I'm looking at a whole bunch of answers to things and I'm making up themes as I go, I would expect there to be less agreement to start than I would when like, yep, the computer says these are the themes there. And from this, I would clump these together. I would just expect that to be more, have more reliability in general. So again, you get less rater bias with a textual approach. But it did seem like once you transfer it to the Likert type questions, the questions that came from the thematic analysis tended to have items that were deemed more important to the participant, which is sort of what we're going for. So it doesn't seem like either one was significantly better than the other in any one way. You also saw a little bit more questions from the thematic analysis rated as slightly easier to understand than the questions from the textual analysis. Could that have been because of the negative wording? There are a lot of things that could have also played into that. So it's not necessarily just one analysis better than the other. And only the thematic analysis questionnaire scores were significantly correlated with personal treatment variables. So it does seem like, even though the author's kind of final finding is textual analysis is more reliable at generating themes that you could use to make your social validity questionnaire, and there's our systematic approach, it did feel like the thematic analysis, while probably more time-consuming and certainly less reliable in general, did result in better questions overall when we're looking at the goal of creating a social validity questionnaire. So
I think that makes sense.
Yeah. So to be real, though, if you're going to do this process for every treatment, you're probably going to do the one that like AI could kind of do for you, even though some of the results might not be as good because they're not necessarily going to be significantly worse. And if our goal is to create things that have that predictive validity, we kind of need to start getting that out a little bit faster. But again,
yeah, efficiency, there's something to be said for it, but maybe you could use the textual approach and then overlay a thematic approach on top of it once you see what you get back, right? Yeah. Any amount of time spent on this is well spent, but that might be a way to sort of expedite the process.
Yeah. But in any case, I read this article hoping to get the answer of how to create a really great social validity questionnaire. And I came through with it with saying, it was nice to know this. I can't wait to see how a lot of other smart people use this process in the future. Come back to me when that's all done, and I will take your questionnaires. No problem.
We didn't solve it.
No, it was very fascinating. I
thought we were going to solve it.
Well, it did feel like one of those studies of sometimes it's nice, when you're like, oh man, I don't know the answer to this. I wish I did. Oh, maybe this study will tell me. And then there's a part of you that's like, I'm so happy that the answer was so freaking complicated that of course I didn't just think of it in the shower one day. But then on the other hand, you're saying that was so freaking complicated. I don't know if I'm ever going to be able to do this.
The greatest minds of our generation has not solved the social validity conundrum.
No, but this seems very promising. I mean, again, there's no reason you couldn't do this again with, say, a language acquisition program or a behavior intervention plan.
All right.
And there's not any reason to think that we don't really know a lot, all the information in terms of like the children weren't able to participate in this process. So we're losing a whole chunk of individuals whose social validity is important to us.
The direct consumers.
Yeah.
All right, let's bring it on home.
All right. So we need more replications, but come on, folks, let's do this. I'm not going to do it, but you can, I'm sure. No problem. Get that, what was the software? Hold on, I'll find it. Use Tropes. I don't know, maybe there's better software now. ChatGPT, quick, whip up a social validity questionnaire for me.
I can't do that, Rob.
Okay.
All right.
Here
we go.
Let's bring it home. We're at the dissemination
quick
station.
Train ride.
Donna, why don't you give us the sum up of all this jazz?
Yeah, so like I said, I was hoping that we were going to solve it today, but we haven't really solved it today. For me, the main take-home point here is we're not doing enough social validity assessment, and it's possible that the assessments that we're doing are not of the scope and quality that they need to be in order to really determine social validity in the way that it was originally defined. I love the concept of social invalidity in that it's something that we need to pursue and not be afraid of in order to better our practice. And my ultimate takeaway is I want to know how the direct consumers feel. And we have some ways of determining that, but we need more research demonstrating the effectiveness and the creative ways in which we can really ask consumers how they feel about any of these areas of social validity. Number 1, number 2, or number 3. So I know that it's possible, right? And the same methods come up again and again, but I just want more so that when we talk to one another about it or we talk to other people about it, we can continue to demonstrate that this is possible, first of all, and ideally that we've then used that to further our application of our science so that the methods that we are using are socially valid according to our consumers. And I don't know that that's the case right now in all areas.
Truth.
I mean, I would say what I learned from I learned a lot of things from this, but not to repeat what you said, Dinah, it would be that even if you're going to use your maybe questionable social validity Likert scale that you got, that may not really be doing everything you needed to, do it early, do it often throughout the whole process of treatment rather than just waiting until the end to sort of pull out your social validity questionnaires and then take that information and say, look, I got all 7s or 1s, whichever one is supposed to be the best number. Because that's missing the point.
Yeah.
It could be worse, but it is also missing the point.
Jackie?
Do better. Use it. Do it always. Do it in research. Do it in practice. Do it always. That's what I learned.
And we have a ways to go.
Oh, a long ways to go. Only 27%.
Right.
It should be 100%.
Did everyone think that this was something like social validity? Yeah, that's done. We did that already. That's all finished. You do that, right?
Man, you like
wow,
pull back the curtain a little bit, right? And I, like I said before we started recording, I feel like I know less now than I did when I started, which is, not a good sign, but it is also indications that there is a lot of room for growth in our field. The other final point I want to make is we also should not be ignoring when we are hearing from folks that there may be aspects of what we are doing that is socially invalid by whatever means that is that we are hearing from that, whether it's disengagement from intervention, right? Absences, complaints from parents or from individuals themselves. All of that is indicators to us that we should be modifying our practice and that we can approach those evidences of invalidity with humility and action.
Speaking of action, let's move on to pairings.
That was not smooth. Okay. Yeah, sure.
Was that a 1 or a 7 in the smoothness scale?
That was about 2.
Is that good or bad? I still
don't know.
It's
bad. Speaking of nothing, here's something. Pairings. It's time for pairings. Pairings is when I tell you about other episodes you might want to check out if you thought this one was interesting, or thought-provoking. So let me tell you.
Don't prompt people to think this wasn't an interesting episode.
I thought it was interesting. So you definitely want to go back and listen to episode 90. That's when we talked about social validity the first time around. I also think you might like to listen to episode 45. We were joined by Devin Sundberg, and we talked about women in behavior analysis, which is a really cool episode.
I did enjoy that episode.
Yeah.
A long time ago now.
Just, after our crushing on Eileen Schwartz, I feel like it's only appropriate to reference back to that episode as well. I also think you could listen to episode 233. This is one in which we talk about developing a standard set for autism outcome with Dr. Ivy Chong. And it has a lot of discussion around evidence-based practice in it, is why I'm recommending it. Also, episode 204, where we talk about trauma-informed applications of ABA with Dr. Adityan Rajaraman. And episode 214, where we talk about compassionate care with Doctors Jessica Rohr and Mary Jane Weiss. Those are my recommendations for episodes. What's up?
Oh, don't forget, I was going to say, we had Dr. Jennifer Austin.
Oh, gosh, also. I'm so sorry.
Episode 204.
Yes. Oh, my bad. Dr. D2 Rajaraman and Dr. Jen Austin. I apologize. And then finally, I like to recommend a snack to go with your episodes that you listen to. My snack today is something that I really enjoy. It gets top marks for me in all areas of social validity, which is the Buddha Bowl, Jackie, from a restaurant that we like to go to. So it's got rice in it, it's got kale in it, it's got sweet potatoes in it, it's got tofu in it, and it's got a delicious tahini dressing in it. But I just want everyone to know that I like the goal of the meal, right? It's delicious, it's healthy, it's a vegetarian meal. I like the way in which it's prepared for me. Someone else makes it. And I like the outcome, which is that I feel good after eating it because it was delicious and also healthful.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, all fronts.
All works.
Top marks all the way around
So we
for
got
the
a
Buddha
7
Bowl.
or a 1?
It's a 7.
Okay.
7.
Yes. That's it.
All right. Well, thank you both for being here. Thanks, everyone, also for listening. We'd love it if you subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or Stitcher, wherever you like to get podcasts. Hey, why not leave us a review to let other people know what you think of the show? It's a great way for us to get social validity. Or is it? Maybe it's not that good a way to get social validity. But in any case, that is the metric. So
I don't know anymore.
Go for it. In those cases, definitely the more stars is the better, I think, with those. Let's not be confused. With that. There are a lot of other places you can find us online. Certainly, you can find us on all the socials as ABA Inside Track. You can go to our website, abainsidetrack.com, to find links to all of the articles that we discussed in this episode, as well as to purchase CEs and find all of our old episodes. If you want even more ABA Inside Track content, you can subscribe on Patreon at patreon.com/ABA Inside Track, where you get all your episodes a week ahead of time, as well as CE discounts, chances to vote on our quarterly listener choice and book club episodes, and free CEs at the $5 and then at the $10 tier for getting access to those listener choice episodes and the book club episodes early. We actually recently did our book club on acceptance and commitment therapy. And as the time this comes out, I think we'll have a poll out, if not already voted on, for what our spring book club is going to be. But you can only vote if you join us on patreon.com/ABA Inside Track. And of course, feel free to email us at any time at abainsidetrack@gmail.com. I want to make sure to give some big thanks to Dr. Jim Carr for recording our intro and outro music, Kyle Sturry for our fabulous interstitial music, and Dan Thabit of the Podcast Doctors for his amazing editing work. Oh, and I almost forgot. Not really. I planned to put it here. The second secret code word, if you are interested in getting CEs for this episode, it is leprechaun. I'm the leprechaun.
Are you saying that like the horror movie? Is that what's going on?
It's actually a Wayne's World reference to the horror movie.
Sure.
Leprechaun, Leprechaun. It's a mythical creature who has gold. He loves to hang out with Darby O'Gill, I think.
He just likes rainbows. Rainbows and gold.
Rainbow. He loves Lucky Charms.
Okay.
Yeah,
Bye,
that's it.
everyone.
All right. We'll be back next week with another fun-filled episode. But until then, keep responding. Bye.
Bye.